In a room full of suits, the quietest voice just exposed 100 million lie. Guess who it was? Life, sometimes it just takes you down a path you never saw coming, a path that feels less like a journey and more like a detour, even a dead end. This is about Elara Jenkins, a woman of 55, her rich, dark skin now beautifully streaked with silver at the temples. Her hands, though accustomed to manual labor, still held the elegant long fingers of a pianist, or, in her forgotten past, a skilled accountant. Born and raised in Riverbend, a sleepy Midwestern town where the rhythm of the loom used to dictate everything, Elara had a story that most folks overlooked. She carried herself with a quiet dignity, but beneath the surface there was a deep well of knowledge, a sharper mind than anyone would guess from her cleaning uniform. She held a distinguished accounting degree from Northwestern, a scholarship kid who'd aced every finance class. But life, as it often does, had other plans. 10 years she'd spent, a decade caring for her ailing mother, watching her dreams of a high-flying career fade like old photographs. After her mother's passing, Riverbend was all she had left, a familiar comfort, but also a constant reminder of what she'd lost. The modest house, the echoes of laughter, and the gnawing financial strain were her daily companions. She took a part-time job at Heritage Threads, a local textile company that had been the heartbeat of Riverbend for generations, a place where the scent of warm cotton and worn machinery filled the air. She just needed to keep her head down, survive, and somehow find a way to breathe again. She figured she'd be just another invisible fixture in the background, cleaning up after the big shots, listening to their endless chatter without ever truly being heard. But destiny, or maybe just dumb luck, had a different script. It was a Tuesday afternoon, sticky with the humid promise of a Midwestern summer storm, and the air in the gleaming main boardroom of Heritage Threads was as thick as molasses. Mr. Alistair Finch, the company's new executive director, was holding court. He was the golden boy, son of the patriarch, slicked back hair, expensive suit, and a perpetual smirk that suggested he knew more than everyone else in the room combined. He was putting on a show for Mrs. Lillian Pratt, the company's financial director, a nervous woman who always looked like she was carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. They were hashing out the final details of Project Loom, global expansion, Alistair's pet project, a venture he swore would catapult Heritage Threads into the big leagues and save them from a looming financial crisis. He gestured grandly at a complex spreadsheet projected onto the wall, rattling off figures and painting a picture of staggering 30% profit margins that, he insisted, would woo the big city investors coming in later that week. Elara was meticulously wiping down the long mahogany table, her movements fluid and practiced. She tried to make herself small, to be just part of the background hum. But then, that 30% figure, it snagged something in her brain. It was like a discordant note in a familiar melody. A whisper of unease, then a prickle of certainty. Her hand, midway through polishing, paused. That number, the way it was calculated, felt off. Terribly off. The muscle in her jaw twitched almost imperceptibly. Alistair, ever the showman, noticed her stillness. He snapped his head towards her. His eyes, usually glazed with self-satisfaction, now held a sharp, impatient glint. "Is there a problem, Miss Jenkins?" he asked, his voice dripping with condescension, a clear dismissal in his tone. "You appear rather captivated by our projections." His tone made it clear he expected her to apologize and scurry away. Elara felt the familiar flush rise to her cheeks, that old heat of being dismissed, overlooked. But this time, something held it in check. The numbers, they truly were screaming in her head, demanding to be acknowledged. Her voice, though soft, was steady, a quiet counterpoint to his bluster. "No problem, sir," she began, carefully placing her polishing cloth on the corner of the table. I just thought perhaps the growth formula on that particular slide, it might be reversed." Alistair's jaw dropped. Lillian, beside him, visibly flinched. Alistair's smirk melted into a mask of pure disbelief, then contempt. "Reversed?" he scoffed, his voice rising, laced with thinly veiled disgust. "Miss Jenkins, with all due respect, you're a cleaner. What on earth do you know about financial formulas?" He didn't wait for an answer, turning back to Lillian, his face contorted with barely contained fury. "This is precisely why we need tighter protocols. A cleaner tampering with sensitive information?" Lillian just wrung her hands, not daring to meet Elara's gaze. Alistair dismissed Elara with a dismissive wave, a gesture that screamed, "You are nothing. You are irrelevant." But as Elara quietly resumed her work, her heart, instead of sinking, felt a strange, quiet stealing. They saw a mop and a bucket. They saw a uniform. They didn't see the mind behind it. And that, she knew, was their biggest mistake. That was the moment the quiet reckoning began. That night, sleep was a distant shore for Elara, a place her mind simply refused to reach. Those numbers, they spun in her head like a broken record, a relentless, dissonant hum that refused to let her rest. It wasn't just a nagging feeling, a mere intuition. It was a deep, unsettling certainty that vibrated in her very bones, a truth screaming, demanding to be heard. Even after all those years away from the spreadsheets and ledgers, the endless nights spent by her mother's bedside, those agonizing years that had chipped away at her dreams of a high-flying career, the formulas, the intricate logic of compound interest and growth projections, the subtle dance of debits and credits, it was all still there, etched into her mind like an old hymn she'd learned by heart and could never forget. She knew, with chilling clarity, that if that one inflated figure on Alistair's slide was indeed wrong, his grand Project Loom wasn't just a fantasy, it was a ticking time bomb. It could unravel, not just taking down heritage threads, a company woven into the very fabric of Riverbend, but every single job, every single family who relied on that textile mill like clockwork. In a town like this, where generations had worked the same looms, lived in the same houses, and trusted in the stability of that factory, that kind of collapse was a disaster nobody could afford to even imagine. It was a weight heavy on her shoulders, a silent burden that pressed down on her heart, the kind that steals your appetite, leaves you staring at the ceiling in the dead of night, and makes every breath feel like a shallow struggle. She felt the profound isolation of being the only one who truly saw the danger, the sheer burning frustration of being dismissed with a casual wave when she held such a critical, devastating piece of the puzzle. But beneath that frustration, a quiet, unyielding determination hardened within her, like steel cooling from a forge. Elara felt the familiar flush rise to her cheeks, that old heat of being dismissed, overlooked. But this time, something held it in check. The numbers, they truly were screaming in her head, demanding to be acknowledged. Her voice, though soft, was steady, a quiet counterpoint to his bluster. "No problem, sir," she began, carefully placing her polishing cloth on the corner of the table. I just thought perhaps the growth formula on that particular slide, it might be reversed." Alistair's jaw dropped. Lillian, beside him, visibly flinched. Alistair's smirk melted into a mask of pure disbelief, then contempt. "Reversed?" he scoffed, his voice rising, laced with thinly veiled disgust. "Miss Jenkins, with all due respect, you're a cleaner. What on earth do you know about financial formulas?" He didn't wait for an answer, turning back to Lillian, his face contorted with barely contained fury. "This is precisely why we need tighter protocols. A cleaner tampering with sensitive information?" Lillian just wrung her hands, not daring to meet Elara's gaze. Alistair dismissed Elara with a dismissive wave, a gesture that screamed, "You are nothing. You are irrelevant." But as Elara quietly resumed her work, her heart, instead of sinking, felt a strange, quiet stealing. They saw a mop and a bucket. They saw a uniform. They didn't see the mind behind it. And that, she knew, was their biggest mistake. That was the moment the quiet reckoning began. That night, sleep was a distant shore for Elara, a place her mind simply refused to reach. Those numbers, they spun in her head like a broken record, a relentless, dissonant hum that refused to let her rest. It wasn't just a nagging feeling, a mere intuition. It was a deep, unsettling certainty that vibrated in her very bones, a truth screaming, demanding to be heard. Even after all those years away from the spreadsheets and ledgers, the endless nights spent by her mother's bedside, those agonizing years that had chipped away at her dreams of a high-flying career, the formulas, the intricate logic of compound interest and growth projections, the subtle dance of debits and credits, it was all still there, etched into her mind like an old hymn she'd learned by heart and could never forget. She knew with chilling clarity that if that one inflated figure on Alistair's slide was indeed wrong, his grand project loom wasn't just a fantasy, it was a ticking time bomb. It could unravel, not just taking down heritage threads, a company woven into the very fabric of Riverbend, but every single job, every single family who relied on that textile mill like clockwork. In a town like this, where generations had worked the same looms, lived in the same houses, and trusted in the stability of that factory, that kind of collapse was a disaster nobody could afford to even imagine. It was a weight heavy on her shoulders, a silent burden that pressed down on her heart, the kind that steals your appetite, leaves you staring at the ceiling in the dead of night, and makes every breath feel like a shallow struggle. She felt the profound isolation of being the only one who truly saw the danger, the sheer burning frustration of being dismissed with a casual wave when she held such a critical, devastating piece of the puzzle. But beneath that frustration, a quiet, unyielding determination hardened within her, like steel cooling from a forge. They saw a mop and a bucket. They saw a uniform. They didn't see the mind behind it. And that, she knew, was their biggest mistake. That was the moment the quiet reckoning began. The next morning, a subtle, almost imperceptible shift took place in Elara. She walked into Heritage Threads not as the quiet cleaner, but as an investigator in disguise. She wasn't some hotshot executive with a keycard that granted access to every locked door, no fancy corner office with a panoramic view of Riverbend, but she had something else, something far more powerful, a sharp, analytical mind, a photographic memory for numbers, and an almost uncanny ability to go utterly unnoticed. She began her quiet investigation, a meticulously planned dance through the corporate hallways. During her regular cleaning rounds, she'd linger a moment longer at discarded printouts and wastebaskets, her eyes quickly scanning the columns of figures before anyone could realize she was looking. She wasn't just cleaning, she was performing a silent audit. She'd memorize sequences, mentally cross-referencing them with what she vaguely remembered seeing on Alistair's presentation slide. Sometimes she'd find herself in forgotten storage rooms, tucked away behind dusty stacks of old fabric bolts, pretending to organize, but really she was searching for any stray reports, any dusty binders, even old financial statements that might shed more light on Heritage Thread's true financial health. It was like she was back in her old accounting classes at Northwestern, only now the stakes were terrifyingly real. Not just a grade on a transcript, real lives and livelihoods depended on her quiet, relentless pursuit of the truth. She'd make tiny, almost invisible calculations on the back of old grocery receipts tucked deep in her apron pocket, using the worn-out pencil stub she always carried, its lead barely visible. She revisited her mental library of formulas, discounted cash flow, return on investment, the nuances of revenue recognition, the subtle ways figures could be massaged to appear more favorable, the cascading effect small errors could have, ballooning into catastrophic discrepancies over time. She even located an old, clunky desktop calculator in a forgotten IT closet, buried beneath obsolete hardware, the kind with big, yellowed buttons that clicked with a satisfying resistance.
She'd tap away silently in the deserted staff break room during her lunch hour, verifying her mental math, her brow furrowed in fierce concentration, a solitary figure in a fluorescent-lit room. No one noticed. No one ever noticed the quiet ones who moved through the shadows, always observing, always learning. She did, however, find an unlikely confidant in Betsy, another longtime cleaner at Heritage Threads. Betsy was a sweet, older lady from the Deep South, with a laugh that crinkled her eyes into warm crescent moons, and a knack for knowing everyone's business without ever seeming nosy. Over lukewarm coffee and chipped mugs from the staff lounge, Elara would casually mention a few odd figures she'd seen in old reports, framing it as a curiosity about company history rather than a looming crisis. "You know, Betsy," she'd say, stirring her coffee, her voice calm despite the storm inside, "sometimes a simple number, just one little thing, can throw everything off, like a single loose thread in a fine tapestry. Just little things, you know? Makes you wonder how folks miss 'em, especially the smart ones upstairs." Betsy, with her knowing smile, a lifetime of understanding packed into her gaze, would just pat Elara's arm. "Honey, if anyone can spot a loose thread, it's you. Your mama always said you had a head for numbers that ran deeper than any calculator. Don't you ever doubt that here. Some folks, they look with their eyes, but you, Elara, you see with your mind. That's a gift." That little bit of quiet encouragement, that unspoken trust from Betsy, a woman who had seen so much of life's quiet struggles and unfair dismissals, was a profound balm to Elara's soul. It wasn't much in the grand scheme of things, but it was enough, a tiny flicker of affirmation that kept her going when the doubts and the sheer weight of her discovery began to creep in. It solidified her resolve. She wasn't just doing this for the company, or even for herself, but for Riverbend, for Betsy, for all the quiet people who often went unheard.
Meanwhile, Alastair Finch remained utterly oblivious, encased in his own self-importance. He was too busy schmoozing potential investors at the exclusive Riverbend Country Club, exchanging hearty laughs and firm handshakes, too caught up in the glittering fantasy of Project Loom to notice anything beyond his own polished reflection in the boardroom table. He'd stride through the offices, barking orders at his overwhelmed assistants, his voice echoing with arrogant confidence, convinced of his own unparalleled brilliance and charm. He truly believed his charisma alone could blind anyone to a few fudge numbers, a few inconvenient truths. Lillian Pratt, on the other hand, grew visibly more anxious with each passing day. Elara would see her pacing our office late into the evenings, the glow of her computer screen painting shadows on her face, her phone pressed to her ear, murmuring about unforeseen complications and revised projections to unseen callers. Lillian seemed to understand something was deeply, fundamentally off, a low hum of dread that mirrored Elara's own certainty, but she was trapped. Too intimidated by Alastair's ruthless ambition, too fearful of losing her job and her hard-earned pension, she dared not challenge him directly. She'd glance at Elara occasionally, a fleeting look of troubled empathy, a silent acknowledgement that they both saw the same dangerous game unfolding, the same looming disaster, but never spoke a direct word. It was a silent ballet of power and fear playing out in the hollowed, polished halls of Heritage Threads, with Elara, the invisible cleaner, meticulously gathering the fragments of truth, unknowingly holding the secret key to its fate. The pressure built, unseen by most, but felt acutely by the few who dared to truly look beneath the surface. Each day brought them closer to the precipice, and closer to the moment when Elara's quiet strength would finally break the suffocating silence. The day of the big presentation dawned, crisp and impossibly bright, belying the storm about to break over Riverbend. Limousines, usually a rare sight in this quiet town, lined the streets outside Heritage Threads, disgorging wealthy investors from the city. Sharp-suited men and women smelling of expensive cologne and ambition, their faces eager for the next big deal. Elara, in her familiar charcoal gray cleaning uniform, her movements practiced and almost invisible, was assigned to serve refreshments in the very boardroom where Alastair was about to spin his grand illusion. She moved through the room like a phantom, pouring coffee into delicate china cups, offering platters of artisanal pastries, her ears keenly attuned to every word, every hushed laugh, every self-important declaration. Alastair, radiating a smug, almost insufferable confidence, launched into his presentation about Project Loom, painting a picture of staggering, almost unbelievable profits. His voice boomed with what he clearly believed was unassailable conviction, his gestures broad and theatrical. He rattled off figures, pointed to elaborate charts, and lingered dramatically on that 30% profit projection, a number that felt like a hot poker in Elara's gut, a bitter taste in her mouth. She could see the investors leaning forward, their eyes gleaming with the promise of easy money, their expressions mirroring Alastair's own greedy satisfaction. And then she couldn't take it anymore. It was like a dam bursting inside her, a lifetime of quiet observation, of unacknowledged talent, of being underestimated, finally reaching its breaking point. She set the tray of sparkling water down with a soft, almost imperceptible clink, a sound that somehow, impossibly, cut through the hum of Alastair's self-congratulatory monologue. Her voice, though still quiet, carried an unexpected resonance, a stillness that commanded attention in a room full of boisterous egos. "Excuse me, Mr. Finch," she said, her voice steady, betraying none of the furious turmoil churning within her. "But the growth formula on slide 7, it appears to be inverted." The entire room froze. You could have heard a pin drop in that cavernous space. The air, which had been buzzing with polite anticipation, suddenly turned to ice, thick with unspoken questions and disbelief.
Alastair Finch whirled around, his face draining of all color, his usually confident features twisting into a mask of pure disbelief and raw, unadulterated fury. "Who in the blazes are you?" he snarled, pointing an accusatory finger, his voice rising in an almost desperate crescendo. "You're a cleaner here. What on earth are you talking about? Do you have any idea what you're even saying?" His voice, laced with furious arrogance and condescension, echoed in the suddenly silent room. Elara met his glare, her posture unwavering, an almost unnerving calm about her. "I am Elara Jenkins, sir," she replied, her voice gaining strength, each word deliberate and clear. "And I used to be a licensed accountant. I've recalculated the figures. That 30% profit you're projecting, it's actually closer to 18.5%. If you proceed with these numbers," she concluded, her voice now ringing with quiet authority, "it won't just be an error, it will be fraud." Chaos erupted. A furious murmur swept through the room, punctuated by gasps and shocked whispers. Investors exchanged bewildered glances, their faces now etched with suspicion instead of greed. Alastair's face was now a sickly shade of green, his jaw clenched so tight she could see the muscle twitching. He sputtered denials, desperate, frantic sounds that sounded hollow and frantic. "This is preposterous. She's a janitor. She has no business, no right to interfere." But then a voice, calm and authoritative, cut through the clamor. It was Mr. Henderson, one of the most respected investors in the room, a man who ran a successful chain of hardware stores across the state and had a reputation for shrewdness and integrity. He'd known Elara's mother back when Elara was a brilliant young woman heading off to college, and he'd always heard about that bright Jenkins girl who had a head for numbers. He stood up, his gaze firm on Alastair, then shifted to Elara, a flicker of recognition in his eyes. "Mr. Finch," Henderson said, his voice surprisingly gentle but laced with an undeniable steel. "Perhaps we should hear her out. Miss Jenkins, could you use the whiteboard, please? Show us your working." Alastair looked like he'd been slapped, then gut-punched. Give her the whiteboard, the audacity! But Henderson's word carried weight. Slowly, deliberately, Elara walked towards the gleaming whiteboard. She picked up a dry erase marker, its black tip a stark contrast against the pristine surface. Under the harsh glare of the recessed lights, with dozens of skeptical, curious, and now deeply suspicious eyes on her, she began to write. Her hand was perfectly steady. She laid out the original formula Alastair had used, then, systematically, step by precise step, she inverted it, showing exactly where his figures had gone catastrophically wrong. She explained the nuance of compound growth versus simple growth, the subtle manipulations that had inflated the returns, detailing the long-term implications. Alastair stood frozen, unable to speak, his face a mask of utter horror, a deer caught in headlights. He tried a weak counterargument, something about acceptable variance, but Elara simply continued, her voice clear and irrefutable, presenting the unvarnished truth, each number a hammer blow to his carefully constructed lie. And then Lillian Pratt, tears welling in her eyes, whispered, "She's right. God help us, she's right." It was barely audible, but in that silent, shocked room, it sounded like a thunderclap. That quiet admission from a trusted insider sealed Alastair's fate. The man who had mocked her, who had treated her as invisible, was now left utterly speechless, exposed, humiliated, and utterly broken by the very woman he'd so arrogantly dismissed. The sweet, satisfying taste of justice, for Elara, was simply the taste of truth, finally, powerfully spoken.
You know, when you drop a stone into a quiet pond, the ripples just keep spreading, far beyond where you tossed it. That's precisely what happened after Elara spoke up in that boardroom. The truth, once confined to her quiet calculations and mental audits, exploded through the polished halls of Heritage Threads like a shockwave, reverberating through Riverbend and beyond. Mr. Henderson, the astute investor from the hardware chain, along with several others who had been poised to sign on the dotted line, pulled out of Project Loom immediately. You could feel the profound disappointment radiating off them, not just at the failed deal and the lost potential profits, but at the sheer audacity of the attempted deception. It wasn't just about money. It was about integrity, about trust in business, and Alastair Finch had shattered that fragile trust like cheap, brittle glass. The news, as it always does in small towns, traveled faster than a telegraph, reaching every porch swing and diner booth. Old Mr. Finch, Alastair's father and the revered company patriarch, who had been recovering from a recent heart scare at his quiet lakeside home and thus missed the entire disastrous presentation, was devastated. He arrived at the office the very next morning, looking frail and worn, but with a steely fire in his eyes that reminded everyone present that he had built Heritage Threads from the ground up, brick by honest brick, with honest sweat and even more honest numbers. He ordered an immediate, ruthless internal investigation, bypassing Alastair entirely. You could practically feel the suffocating shame radiating from Alastair as his father's profound disappointment settled over him like a heavy, inescapable shroud. Stripped of his golden boy aura, his carefully constructed facade crumbled. Alastair was put on administrative leave, his future at the company, and perhaps his career in general, hanging by a thread. He walked around the office like a ghost, a pale shadow of his former arrogant self, his usual bluster replaced by a defeated silence. For the first time, Elara felt a strange, quiet pity for him. Not because he deserved mercy, but because he'd built his entire world on such fragile illusions, illusions that had now spectacularly collapsed. The satisfaction for her wasn't in his downfall, but in the simple, undeniable triumph of truth. Lillian Pratt, on the other hand, experienced a profound, almost spiritual shift. The relief in her eyes was palpable, like someone finally allowed to breathe deeply after holding their breath for years, or being released from a suffocating weight.
She was publicly commended by old Mr. Finch himself for her integrity, for quietly trying to raise concerns, and for validating Elara's findings, even when she felt utterly powerless to act herself. Her standing in the company, which had been subtly eroding under Alistair's reckless leadership and his dismissive attitude towards her expertise, was now fully restored, even elevated. And the very first thing she did? She sought out Elara, not with corporate formality, but with genuine, heartfelt gratitude. "Elara," she said, her voice softer and more vulnerable than Elara had ever heard it, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "Thank you. You saved us all. You saved me." It was a simple statement, but the weight of gratitude and unspoken relief behind it was immense. From that moment, a new, unexpected relationship began to blossom between them, a bond built not on rigid corporate hierarchy, but on shared truth, mutual respect, and a profound sense of trust. Lillian, with her intricate, encyclopedic knowledge of Heritage Thread's inner workings and its deep-rooted history, became Elara's invaluable guide, helping her navigate the complex corporate labyrinth of internal politics and compliance, while Elara provided the unwavering moral compass, the unblinking eye that saw only truth in numbers. Heritage Threads, instead of collapsing into bankruptcy and scandal, began a painful but absolutely necessary process of internal reckoning and comprehensive restructuring. It was like tearing down an old, unstable wall, riddled with hidden rot, to build something fundamentally stronger, something that could truly endure. Elara, the woman who once quietly cleaned their offices, the invisible cleaner, as she often felt, was now paradoxically viewed as the unlikely architect of their survival, the quiet force that had pulled them back from the brink. Old Mr. Finch himself, still frail but resolute, personally approached her. He offered her a senior accounting position, a prestigious, well-paying role that would have been a dream come true for her younger self, the ambitious finance student. But Elara, with a quiet wisdom honed by years of adversity and a newfound clarity of purpose, gently declined. "Mr. Finch," she said, her gaze steady, "my place isn't just in the numbers anymore. It's about making sure these kinds of mistakes, these kinds of deceptions never happen again. Not here, not anywhere I can help prevent it." Instead, she accepted a newly created role, reporting directly to him: Integrity and Oversight Specialist. It wasn't about being in charge in the traditional sense, but about being the watchful eye, the moral guardian of the company's financial soul, ensuring transparency and ethical conduct from the ground up. She also began collaborating closely with regional financial regulatory bodies, quietly sharing insights on how such complex frauds could be subtly woven into seemingly legitimate projections, hoping to create new safeguards and prevent other companies and other small towns from falling victim to similar deceptions. Her quiet strength, once a personal virtue, was now a formidable public force, fundamentally redefining her life and, little by little, reshaping the very fabric of Riverbend itself, proving that even the most unassuming individuals can ignite profound, lasting change. A single ripple in a pond can become a wave that changes everything in its wake. Elara's story, the quiet dignity with which she'd unveiled the truth in that sterile boardroom, didn't just stay within the polite confines of Heritage Threads or the bustling streets of Riverbend. It spread like wildfire, picked up first by local news stations that usually only covered bake sales and high school football scores, then by regional networks, and finally by national media outlets that rarely glanced at small-town America. Suddenly, the invisible cleaner from Riverbend was transformed into an unlikely symbol of resilience and quiet courage, a testament to the powerful, often overlooked idea that integrity truly doesn't come with a fancy title or a corner office. People across the country called her a hero, an underdog who had stood up to the big shots, the very kind of tale that resonates deeply in the American spirit. While she appreciated the sentiment, a deep, inherent humility kept her grounded. Elara never sought fame or revenge. All she ever truly wanted was for the truth to be heard, unvarnished and clear, to prevent others from falling prey to such carefully constructed deceptions. Alastair Finch, his arrogance shattered and his once sterling reputation in tatters, quietly left Riverbend, a cautionary tale whispered in hushed tones at the local diner and the town barber shop, a stark reminder of the steep price of hubris and a lack of moral compass. His silence was a stark contrast to the growing chorus of voices praising Elara.
Months later, the echoes of Elara's actions had transformed into tangible change. She found herself standing on a small, unassuming stage at the Riverbend Community Center, the very same place where her mother had volunteered countless hours, patiently teaching kids to read and helping seniors navigate their bewildering tax forms. The room was packed, not with reporters or investors this time, but with her neighbors, faces she'd known all her life. The town's mayor, her old high school chemistry teacher who used to let her stay late to solve extra problems, families who worked at the mill, and even Betsy, her cleaning colleague, beaming with unadulterated pride in the front row. Their eyes were filled with admiration, gratitude, and a profound sense of hope for a future built on honesty. Elara wasn't giving a fiery corporate speech. Her voice was soft, conversational, like she was simply sharing a cup of coffee with a trusted friend on her porch on a lazy Sunday afternoon. She spoke about the quiet power of observation, about never, ever underestimating anyone based on their appearance or their job title. The true measure of a person, she explained, her gaze sweeping across the diverse faces in the audience, isn't in their title or the clothes they wear or how much money they have in the bank. It's in their character and the courage to stand up for what's right, even when your voice shakes, even when you're scared stiff. It was a message that resonated deeply in the heart of this small town, a truth they instinctively understood because they lived it every day. Building on that undeniable momentum, Elara, with the quiet but unwavering support of old Mr. Finch and Lillian, decided to give back in a tangible way. She started a small community fund, humbly named the Riverbend Foundation. It wasn't a flashy corporate initiative. There were no grand PR announcements. It was built from the ground up, with humble bake sales at the church, local talent shows at the high school, and small, heartfelt donations from neighbors who wanted to contribute. Its purpose was simple, yet profoundly impactful: to offer scholarships to bright, local kids who might otherwise face insurmountable financial hurdles, just as she once had, ensuring their potential wasn't wasted due to lack of opportunity. And crucially, it aimed to support adults who had to put their dreams on hold for family responsibilities. Microgrants for job training, assistance with childcare, resources that could help people get back on their feet, just as she had tirelessly cared for her mother. It was designed to be a quiet lifeline for those who might otherwise fall through the cracks, a testament to Riverbend's enduring spirit of community and mutual aid. One crisp autumn afternoon, weeks after the initial whirlwind had settled, Elara found herself back in the main boardroom at Heritage Threads. The infamous Slide 7, with its fraudulent figures, was gone, erased from history. In its place were new, accurate projections, reflecting the company's newfound commitment to transparency and ethical dealings. She ran her hand over the polished mahogany table, a faint, genuine smile touching her lips. There was a quiet peace in knowing the numbers were now true, a sense of deep, abiding satisfaction that transcended any fleeting personal triumph. She hadn't just saved a company. She had, in her own unassuming way, helped to heal a community, inspiring them to rediscover its own strength and voice. As the sun began to set over Riverbend, casting long, golden shadows across the town, Elara felt a profound sense of belonging, a rootedness she hadn't felt in years. She stood for a moment by the window in the community center, watching the last light fade from the sky. She knew she wasn't just part of the story anymore. She was actively helping to write the next chapter, ensuring that the quiet whispers of truth, no matter how small or seemingly insignificant, would never again be drowned out by the noise of arrogance or deception. The echoes of her courage would continue to resonate,
a testament to what one person, armed with integrity, could achieve.
The journey of Elara Jenkins reminds us that true integrity often whispers when arrogance shouts. Her story is a powerful testament that judgment based on appearance, profession, or background is not just unfair, it's a blindfold that can obscure the most vital truths. How many brilliant minds, how many crucial observations are lost because we as a society are too quick to dismiss those who don't fit our preconceived notions? Elara's quiet courage in the face of blatant disrespect is a beacon, showing us that speaking up, even when your voice trembles, can dismantle mountains of deceit. It teaches us that authenticity and resilience are far more valuable than any corporate title or fleeting prestige. This tale offers a profound lesson for all of us, especially as we navigate an increasingly complex world. It's a call to examine our own biases, to truly see and hear the people around us, regardless of their station. Are we contributing to the toxic silence that allows injustice to fester, or are we amplifying the voices that need to be heard? Elara's journey underscores that finding your voice isn't just about confronting external wrongs. It's about claiming your intrinsic worth, a value that no one can ever take from you. It reminds us that where there's a will, there's a way, and that quiet determination can move even the most immovable obstacles. What struck you most about Elara's unwavering resolve? Have you ever witnessed or experienced a moment when someone underestimated you only for you to prove them profoundly wrong? Share your thoughts and stories in the comments below. Your experiences are part of this vital conversation. If Elara's story resonated with you, if it stirred a sense of hope or courage, please give this video a thumbs up. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more powerful narratives that deserve to be brought into the light. May you find peace in your own truths and courage in every step forward.